Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on Head to Head, a Star Wars show. So it looks like things are really hopping now because Kathleen Kennedy not only wasn't fired, but her contract has actually been extended. How long has it been extended? And is this good for Star Wars? We're going to talk about it right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So I was really kind of surprised, to be honest.
Yeah, man.
I mean, when we first found out that not only was Kathleen Kennedy not fired, but it turns out that her contract's actually been extended.
Yeah, for another 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was just completely amazed by that. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, man. I mean, well, first of all, let me ask you this. Did you really want her gone?
That's a good question.
And
that's really what's going to encompass our whole discussion tonight was
right.
The whole fact that, at first I wasn't really going to address this. I was thinking, you know what? We don't really need to go maybe into this. But then because the last few shows and even the next show is going to deal a little bit with the future of Star Wars, I thought it was going to be good. So as always, we're going to discuss this from a certain point of view. Okay, so her contract's been extended for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I think that you were saying, before our little segment theme, did I even want her gone?
Right.
And the answer to that is that I actually had mixed feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
So on one hand, yes, I did want her gone because I think that there was a lot of things that she's done with the franchise that are not only what George Lucas would not have wanted, but I also think that in some ways it's destructive to the franchise. I think that she's the reason why a lot of these negative things are happening. And it all stems from something that we had basically talked about. And that's quite simply that from a production standpoint, she's a phenomenal producer.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that right now she's a studio head, and she's not acting like a studio head. She's trying to get in and do all the, almost like producer-like things, but of course she can't do that because she still has to run the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And she's basically dividing her time and splitting it up, and I just think that she's not really doing the job for which she was hired.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the whole franchise has been suffering greatly, quite frankly, for that.
Okay, well, let's just kind of like walk everyone kind of through this. So, George Lucas sells Lucasfilm to Disney for a whopping, $1 billion price. And so then, okay, the first thing we kind of get is The Force Awakens, right? Force Awakens, arguably everybody can say it was a successful project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Universally, everybody kind of feels that The Force Awakens was a good movie. And then we have the follow-up with Rogue One, right? So Rogue One comes out, and it's doing pretty well. So then, at that point, everybody's like, okay, this is cool. We're getting new Star Wars content. It's good. We got The Force Awakens. We got Rogue One. Now, here comes The Last Jedi and then Solo. Right? So, of course, the movie, The Last Jedi kind of definitely divided, the fan base. But then we also have Solo, which was a good movie. I mean, I don't think anybody had problems with the actual story or the actual movie itself. However, the fact that it wasn't marketed in enough time to really reap the benefits or reap the financial rewards from it kind of fell short. So that was actually the lowest grossing Star Wars movie ever. Now, we do know that they did have problems with, Lord and Miller, who originally were set to direct Solo. They were fired, kind of like basically after 80% of the movie was basically done. And then in comes Ron Howard to clean things up, clean house. And Solo is still now that people have had a chance to see it, now they want Solo too.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's my whole point, is the fact that, so at first, everybody was kind of like, yeah, I don't really care about Solo. And I was included in on that. I mean, I'll be the first person to admit that I didn't necessarily think that they needed Solo, that it was anything. It wasn't that I was necessarily against it, even though I was having a little bit of a problem with, do I really want Harrison Ford's iconic performance as Han Solo? Do I want that destroyed in some way? Do I... Yeah, I don't know. It just didn't really sit well with me.
It's funny that you actually cared. I mean, I get why, because one, you love Harrison Ford and his portrayal of Han, but I was actually shocked that you didn't want to see a Solo movie, but you want to see an Obi-Wan movie.
Yeah.
Or a series or so.
Well, and I know that this is where, it's almost like, I know your argument has been very similar to the one that I would have made against Solo, whereas... I would say that the difference is, in my view, and fortunately in the view of quite a few people...
This is a certain point of view. So
yeah, this is a certain point of view. I think that there's more story in Obi-Wan in between 3 and 4 than Han Solo's origin story. And the only reason why I bring this up, at least in that way, is because... you basically, you pretty much have Han Solo's origin. I mean, it's more or less like everybody kind of knows, okay, he was a smuggler, he met Chewie saved him, there's like a life debt there. There's a lot of things that we had gleaned. And even though I think that Harrison Ford's portrayal of Han Solo was so good that it turned what could have been a two-dimensional character into a more multi-dimensional character, definitely Harrison Ford is of the opinion. That's one of the reasons why Harrison Ford didn't like to play him. Harrison Ford didn't really want to come back to him because he pretty much felt that there was no real depth or anything to that character. Whereas I think, and many of you guys, I'm sure, feel that because of the way that he portrayed that character, there is a lot of depth there. And there, Timothy Zahn's novels pretty much prove it. I mean, there's just a lot of things that go into it that if you really look at Han's character and the challenges that he faces and the obstacles and the tug of war and all that, there's really a lot there. There's a lot to explore with that. But that said, I don't necessarily think that a Han Solo origin story is really what everybody needs. I would argue that Han's story, maybe in between A New Hope and Empire or post Return of the Jedi, for instance, that would be interesting to watch. But again, I thought Solo was great. I mean, once the movie came out, I'm like, hey, this is actually pretty good. This is a really good movie. And I thought, even though I thought that Alden how do you say that guy's name? Ehrenreich. Yeah, Alden Ehrenreich's performance was a little bit different than Harrison Ford, but you can kind of tell the way that he played it, though, that you could see this character growing into the Harrison Ford version.
Right.
And I mean, I think, I don't know, I just think that right there, to me, really sums up where these characters can go. Because a lot of times, you think of them as, they're these one-dimensional characters or whatever it is. But then you see how this stuff comes out, and Solo is a perfect example. You see the movie come out, you're like, okay. Now, granted, the reality is it was a fun movie. It was good. I still don't think that we needed it, though. Now, you can make the same argument for Obi-Wan. You can say, well, okay, he was on Tatooine. He was basically watching over Luke. He was doing all this stuff or whatever. We didn't really need all that stuff. But I would just, where my argument would come in, if you're talking about that versus Solo, is I would say that there's more in that time period that you can deal with. There's more story from Obi-Wan's point of view that I think could really make a good, and again, I'm not saying, do like a 5-season show or do a whole trilogy of films. The whole limited series that they're planning on doing, I think is a great idea. I think that that's good. That's like a kind of a one and done sort of thing. You basically have Obi-Wan coming out with this stuff and we find out what he's been doing and some of the key things that happen that basically connect the thread of episode 3 and 4. Because here's the thing that I find really, really interesting. When you really stop and think about all the stuff that's covered that time period, and there's a lot of stuff now in Star Wars that's covered in between episode 3 and 4, there's still not really a huge connective thread between the prequels and the original trilogy. There's still not a lot. You're starting to see it a little bit in The Mandalorian. You saw some of it in Solo, actually, where you start to see the Empire and the effect it's having on the galaxy, and you're seeing it more from a like a microcosm rather than the macrocosm, because a lot of the stuff has been like this wide sweeping, crazy things. But I just think personally that there needs to be more story in that whole thing.
Well, I will say this. In regards, to Kathleen, I think that she has, she's ultimately responsible. I mean, that's just the bottom line. She's ultimately responsible for the franchise. And I think that you really have to make sure that you have people who are under you who truly understand your product. And I think that's where a lot of times things have kind of gone by the wayside. And she herself has to understand her product, because this was something that she didn't create. It was created by George, but she worked very closely with George as producer, but I don't think she really worked with George overall as the visionary of Star Wars. She sees, of course, the potential in how much money it can make, sure. As a producer, as a studio head, yeah. She knows it's a global phenomenon and, it's a part of pop culture. So from that standpoint, you can see why, Kathleen Kennedy wants to be all about this. And she was with George for she started off with Spielberg. I mean, she's worked with some heavyweights, man. I mean, she's worked with Spielberg, with E.T. before she went over there, with George Lucas. So my whole thing is, do you really truly understand what you have or what you're carrying? You're carrying Star Wars, this whole galaxy, this whole vision that's created by this man who, it's not like George wrote this story and then sold it to somebody else to do. He created it, he shot it, he directed it, what I'm saying? Like it's literally his baby. So for Kathleen to now have it, I don't think she really understands
exactly
what's he carrying, to borrow a line from that movie. So I think that's where we're in this position now where a lot of people are looking at Kathleen like, you got to go. What the heck are you doing? It's because I don't think she truly understands the wide sweeping effect that Star Wars has had on people's lives. I mean, look, even my life, like I said, I wouldn't have gotten into production or, any of it if it hadn't been for Star Wars. Like, that's what piqued my interest. I wanted to know how they did this stuff. So that was like my initial thing.
Yep.
So, it's affecting everyone on a different level. And now when you're at the helm, now you're you're the front runner or the one who's in control. You have the responsibility of like, okay, I got to get the right directors. I got to get the right people in place to make sure that I can carry on the legacy that George started. Now,
Well, and that's it.
Mhm.
Exactly what you're saying is the fact that they have to see. The mystery to me is, why is it that Dave Filoni, who pretty much studied under Lucas and all this other stuff, seemingly like Kathleen Kennedy did, right? I mean, it's kind of like it was a slightly different relationship in a sense, but she
Right.
was basically groomed to take over Lucasfilm and everything like that. So she had to have studied under him in some way. I mean, there had to be some sort of a mentoring type of a thing going on.
Right.
How is it that Dave Filoni totally gets it? He creates The Mandalorian. Everybody goes psycho over the thing. You know, Kathleen Kennedy produces a sequel trilogies, and there's been, I mean, they made a lot of money, you know, but that's about it. It divided the fans. It, it did this whole toxic thing.
But then once again, it goes back to, what were you groomed to do? Like, she was groomed to run Lucasfilm. So if you're going to run, like, it's kind of like how we say in our production things, like, you can't shoot and run the business. You got to pick one. You know, so I think she needs to pick a side and stick to it. So she's, quite honestly, she's better at, you know, crunching the numbers, make it like the producer side, like you said. She's better at that. That's what she's strongest.
Yeah.
But leave the creative side to people who really understand Star Wars. And that's what I'm saying. Like, when you look at, I can see, even though I wasn't there, but I can just see in my mind that Filoni is probably like sitting at the feet, because you have to remember, Filoni's a storyteller as well. You know, he comes from the animation world, but he's still telling stories. So that's innate in him. He's used to telling stories. It's just through animation or cartoon or whatever you want to use. And that's why he and George had that bond, because they're both storytellers. And quite frankly, that's what George is best at. He's not even a great director. He's better at being a storyteller. Indiana Jones, Red Tails, so on and so forth.
Sure.
So once again, you have to understand, like, okay, in order for the team to be successful, everybody has to play their position, but you have to put the people in the position where they're the strongest. Everybody can't be the point guard or the quarterback. You know, sometimes you got to have your butt on the line. and a lot of times it's the grubby work that people don't, you know, you don't get all the recognition and all that stuff for, but at the end, it's really what holds everything together. It's kind of like the force. It penetrates us, binds us.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's the thing. I think that a lot of times what ends up happening is, and I think that you made the best point early on, is the fact that Star Wars is not just your typical movie franchise. It's kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that what ends up happening is people in her position, especially because she's such an amazing producer, and she really is, and you know, she was with Spielberg for a long time. I mean, there's just like a lot of stuff that she's got a really good pedigree, in other words.
Definitely.
But the thing is that I think that when she took on Star Wars, she kind of looks at it like, I'm not really sure if it's a situation to where the studio head is kind of a newer thing and she's not used to that role. And maybe what's happening is she's still in that producer mindset, but, you know, there's like, she has to be the studio head now and she's just not used to it? Or is it like what you had said? Does she just not understand what it is she has? I mean, when you're holding the keys to the kingdom of the Star Wars universe, that's a big thing. I don't care if you're a fan or not a fan. That's a really big deal.
Oh, definitely. And I think that when you know, you got to think about it too. She's coming in and she's going up with, you know, she's going head to head with Bob Iger. You know, you got to think about like where she's coming from. Like, okay, I'm running Lucasfilm. Now I'm coming to Disney where Bob Iger is like the guy. And okay, like now I got to play ball with the big boys. So I think she's also trying to prove herself that, you know, like, I belong here. I can do all this stuff too. And, you know, let me flex my power in a way. But I think to that point, I think that's where she lost sight of the franchise. and start looking at it based upon dollar signs instead of the story. And that's what Star Wars is always going to be about. It's the story. And if you have no story, you have no Star Wars. And I think that's what Filoni gets, what we saw in that gallery. Like when you hear this man talk and him and Favreau.
I mean, it's inspiring. Yeah. I mean, it's even beyond like, oh, this guy gets it. I mean, it's completely inspiring.
Exactly.
When you hear Filoni in particular talk about Star Wars, it really is kind of like getting an inspirational pep talk, and you really start to feel it and you start to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, it's no accident. Of all of our shows, the most popular one that has the most views by far is Dave Filoni Explains the Balance of the Force.
Right.
And that's because everybody just understands that Filoni gets it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, as he kind of, well, I won't say he put it this way, but this is kind of how I kind of interpreted his thing. It's like a Christmas tree. The lightsabers, the X-Wings, the fighting, the battles, and all that stuff, those are all the ornaments on this Christmas tree. That's what decorates. But the story of Star Wars is essentially, the boy dreaming of being more, wanting to be more, feeling that he can be more, and now he doesn't know where his place is in the world, and he's trying to find it, and then he goes on this adventure, and this journey to eventually discover himself and more. That's the story of Star Wars. And so then it's just now with that, you get lightsabers and X-Wings and all that stuff.
What it comes down to is the story of Star Wars is the classic hero's journey tale.
Right.
And essentially, one of the things that Lucas did that I think really makes a huge difference is that he used a lot of the classic storytelling tropes, and he pretty much took all these influences and he mashed them together and put it in a sci-fi fantasy setting, and then that becomes Star Wars. And that's why it's timeless. It's not tied to a particular thing. This is one of the reasons why, although it's getting a little bit, because it's been going on for so long, but that's one of the reasons where you have a little bit of a difference with, say, Star Trek, because Star Trek being more of a sci-fi thing is more tied to time periods and things like that, and the technology and the advancements and all that, because it's based very much in science, whereas, and it's very, it's another microcosm as well, because they get really into the details and things like that, where with Star Wars, it's a little bit different. Star Wars is a little bit
imaginative. It's more imaginative than factual.
Wide brush strokes, broad stroke type of thing. I mean, it's a little bit more of a big picture kind of thing. And it's really more about themes. I think that's really what it comes down to. Star Wars is really built upon themes. It's not so much in the details.
All right.
And I think that this is where fans really do a disservice to themselves, as well as do a disservice to pretty much the fandom in general. And that is that they try to
explain too much.
They either try to explain too much or they try to make Star Wars what it isn't.
Right.
It's like they don't understand. It's really more thematic than specific. And they try to sci-fi the thing to death, and that's not really what it was ever meant to be. And that's why when there's this thing on YouTube, it was an interview that Christopher Nolan did with George Lucas that occurred a couple of years ago. It was like a 2-hour thing or something. And it was so fascinating because you have one director interviewing basically another one. And when you really hear George Lucas talk about Star Wars and kind of his plan and his vision and what he was trying to do, you could see that the fandom clearly just doesn't get it. It went from everybody was kind of hanging with it to once it started getting handed off to multiple generations, now everybody has all these different expectations.
Well, yeah, not only that, but I think because of, the way the world is changing with social media, information being out there. You got to remember, like in 1977, there was no internet. There was none of this. Like, you had to just take things at face value of what they gave you. But now, people are trying to, research and back, like you have all this information now, which is cool. Don't get me wrong, because for us as fans, like how awesome is it that I can get on Wikipedia and, you know, pull up some random character and I have this whole dossier on them. But, you know, when you grew up, there was none of that. And so because of that, you know, I think a lot of people are trying to look for explanations to everything now because they're so used to consuming information.
You know, it's amazing too, because thank goodness for stuff like that for shows like ours. Because, you know, I mean, it's the it's the ultimate in research. I mean, when we're sitting there trying to put something together and it's like, man, what, you know, what's the name of it? I mean, thank goodness, you know, we do have Ronaldo usually, but pretty much it's nice to be able to go back and check some of these things, or now that you have the story group. But as you pointed out, in some ways that's kind of muddled everything up.
Well, yeah, because like you think about, like, I can remember back to my childhood, you know, I mean, granted, like I came up, you know, in the Barney era, but still Sesame Street and all that stuff. Everything was about, you know, using your imagination, think, you know, your wildest dreams. Like these are the things. So it caused you to just let your mind wander. And so a lot of those, so Star Wars kind of fell into that whole wonder, like, okay, I wonder, you know, if Luke could do this, or I wonder if this could happen, or I wonder what they're going to do next. You know, you always had this wonder and you just kind of just took it all in and just enjoyed it. Well, now everybody's trying to fact check and prove, and, you know, so it's gotten so to the point where it's like you can't have an imagination anymore.
You know, that's actually a really good point too, is the fact that a lot of times everybody needs the context for every little thing now.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and it gets to the point to where nobody wants to use their imagination. Everybody wants all the literal, but they don't want. They just, it's almost like it has to now subscribe to their point of view. It's kind of like you said, you know, now that the world's changed in some ways for the negative, it brings a lot of that baggage into the way that people view Star Wars.
Yeah, it's like they can't turn their brain off and just be a kid and get in and just enjoy something.
I mean, exactly. It's like one of the biggest things to me is like, you know, people will be like, well, it's not reflecting society in this way, or it's not reflecting this, or it's not fair to this, or whatever. It's like, guys, this isn't supposed to be a reflection of real life. You know, they're saying, well, you know, you got to reflect. I'm like, you're on other planets. You got like lightsabers and TIE fighters, and
you're choking people across the galaxy.
You're doing, ships. I mean, what part of you, like, how does this resemble real life? I mean, Can't we just, why can't we have, this is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. They're not like Earth-like problems.
Right, and exactly the way it starts off like a fairy tale. You know, when you read a fairy tale, you know, a long time ago in a land far, far away. Well, that's why they said a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Right.
You know, it starts off as a fairy tale.
It's so obvious.
It's obvious.
I mean,
there.
Exactly. You know? It's like, I don't understand. And, you know, you have people, they want, you know, all kinds of different, all the stuff that plagues us. They want it. Now, I get it. There's certain things that, you know, you do have to try to be aware of, you know.
Sure.
And you do want to make things fair and equal for actors that are involved, for, you know, for the crew, for all this other stuff. You want to balance. You know, you don't want any kid going, hey, how come there's no characters that look like me?
Right.
You know, you do want something like that. But at the same time, though, it's kind of like you have to balance that with just understanding that you can't take all of the baggage and the social issues and all that we have here on Earth and apply it to like every story that's ever written.
Right. Exactly. So as we're talking about Kathleen, you know,
occasionally. Well, that's a nice thing about this. Well, again, you know, this is great. I mean, it's kind of a discussion thing. And one of the things that I like about this particular topic that we have is you could really go just about anywhere with it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And we probably will.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. Well, I mean, we'll almost have to because, you know, unfortunately, I should take this time. Hopefully people will be watching the rebroadcast of this thing. But as we go live, for some odd reason, this thing started a brand new stream. It's not actually streaming on the pre-made event. So there probably was a lot of people that were waiting. Hopefully they're not still waiting. on where we were supposed to be streaming. Sometimes the software does that. I don't know. It gets kind of weird. But yeah, normally I think that this would spawn a lot of chats.
Right.
But one of the things that, and hopefully when people are watching the rebroadcast of this, they'll chat in the comments because we love to answer the comments. But this is the kind of thing that I think that people should really use instead of just dealing with should Kathleen's, should her contract be extended? Should she be fired? Should use this to spawn discussions about the broader future of Star Wars and what exactly have they done wrong and what exactly have they done right? Because there is both, it's not like,
Sure.
We said this at the opening of the show, basically. It's not like everything that she did was wrong. I mean, she's made the company like billions of dollars.
Definitely.
And it's not like the movies were really bad. It's just they don't stand up to the original trilogy.
Well, not only that, and I think, like I said, I think people just had different expectations. And I think, it's kind of like how I felt about the recent movie, the sequel to Coming to America. Like a lot of my friends and a lot of people were like hoping that it was going to live up to the, 1988 version. I'm like, it's not. I could tell you out the gate. Cause
yeah,
it
in fact,
really,
I'm actually surprised that it was as good as it was. There's no way in the world that it could ever be anywhere close to the original. The original was like a
lightning in a bottle.
Lightning in a bottle.
But the problem that I had, and this is, making the comparison to Star Wars with Coming to America, is that one, you have fans of both, both of the movies, and you have people who have the expectation that they want it to be kind of like the 1988 version, or a lot of fans wanted Star Wars to look like the 1977, New Hope. Okay, we know it's not going to happen. However, there are certain things that follow a sequel, and a lot of people think a sequel is just like another movie, but it's like, no, the purpose of the sequel is to really expand the characters. So I make the comparison to another thing that we've watched, Karate Kid, right? First Karate Kid, okay, we see Daniel in a certain place. Second Karate Kid, all right, now he's over in Japan. Okay, you could tell he's grown, both mentally, like he's not as whiny. He doesn't make some of the same mistakes that he did in the first movie, but he's still learning. But we still see the advancement of him. We still see the advancement of Miyagi. We still see the advancement of a lot of these different characters. And then even further, it goes into Cobra Kai, where we see huge growth in a lot of these different characters. And then we see the expansion of them. Same with Coming to America. That's the problem. I feel like we got to rehash, or they try to rehash a lot of the same stuff from the first one. And that's where it lost me, because it's like the same people making the same jokes almost the same way. And it's just kind of like, ugh. I didn't really care for it like that. I really didn't even laugh, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of places where I laughed in it. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought that I had really low expectations of the film, which is one of the reasons why I think I actually enjoyed it on some level.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it advanced some of the stuff, but the problem that I had was the exact thing that you brought up. It was almost retreading the original, just with a different spin.
Right.
And everything else. But I mean, some of the characters that were growing around him, I thought were cool. I thought the kid was cool, and he was learning some lessons.
Yeah, but the thing is, it lacked depth, and I think.
Well, sure.
And I think that's what made the first movie believable, was because you really felt like, Akeem and Simi were fish out of water. You really believed that these guys are wandering around New York like confused. But I didn't feel that in this one, But comparing it to Star Wars with The Last Jedi, once again, the first and the sequel was The Force Awakens. Everyone said it was like derivative. Oh, it's too much like, A New Hope. Okay, I can see where people would say that. However, then we get to, The Last Jedi. Now you're trying to expand these characters and take them in places like Luke being like, disenfranchised or grumpy and, like this crabby old man on this island. And, you see Han, that was one of the things that I love that you always bring up. It's the growth of Han in The Force Awakens. Because, before, in the original, in The New Hope, he's like, oh, the Force, that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And then now he's like, no, it's true, all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like to see Han actually acknowledge that, saying Vader and all this stuff, was like, man, like there's the growth in these characters. So you saw, once again, the expansion of, you see Han not so selfish like he was in the original. Now he's trying to sacrifice himself for his son. He has things to live for.
Well, and that was it. I mean, because Han actually did a lot of growing through each of the movies. I mean, in A New Hope, he was completely all about himself. None of that stuff. He didn't care about anything or anyone. Then you go into Empire Strikes Back, and you can tell he's torn. It's like, okay, I got this price on my head. I got to go pay this debt or whatever. But he's trying to do, well, okay, I'm going to get the princess out in the fog. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to stay, and I'm going to try to keep.
Yeah, he's invested.
He's invested. I mean, there's something there for him. There's something pulling him back. And then, of course, by the time Return of the Jedi comes along, now he's fully invested in everything. He's still who he is.
True.
But he's invested in something different. And I really like what you brought up with the Karate Kid, because that was one of the problems I think that people had with the third one.
Yeah.
The third one was almost a retread of the first one, and there was almost like a regression.
Yeah.
And even though the Terry Silver character was cool, I mean, he was a bit over the top, but it was kind of cool to see sort of like a super Kreese, He's like super rich, even crazier, and all he has is vengeance. And I mean, I thought it was a really cool spin when they turned, because I remember the trailer for that.
You saw him in the Cobra Kai,
Well, and like Daniel was just like being like really aggressive, and he's breaking all these boards and all this. And what I thought was going to happen, where they probably should have gone with that, is they probably should have had it to where he just completely went dark for a while, and Miyagi would end up, because the original thing was they were going to have Miyagi have another student that would have to go up against Daniel, and then Daniel eventually realizes, like, what am I doing? I'm becoming somebody that I'm not, and then, go back or whatever. But they didn't quite, I mean, they kind of did that, but they didn't quite go far enough. It's almost like they went up to a certain point, and then they brought it back a little bit too quickly, in my opinion. But again, that's basically it. Whereas something in The Last Jedi, going back to Star Wars now, and this is something that I think everybody forgets. Everybody forgets about Poe. Because that whole movie was really about Poe's growth from being that renegade cowboy-like,
the
hotshot pilot, I'm going to like show off. And
yeah, he's basically like Maverick.
Yeah, pretty much. Or an early Han maybe. And, I'm making jokes, I'm being light. And growing and being like, no, this is what being a leader really means. You have to make that hard decision. You can't always just go in with guns blazing. You got to do what's right for the group, not necessarily what's going to bring you the most glory.
Right.
And that was something that is completely ignored when people talk about The Last Jedi. Everybody talks about grumpy Luke.
Right.
Which there is that. I'm not saying that, people don't have valid points one way or the other, whether they like it or not, but you have to really stop and think that there's a thing with Poe there that everybody just kind of ignores.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. There's a lot to and like I said, it's actually a brilliant movie, but I just think it was so completely different. But I think it goes back to, something we say till we blow in the face, because there was no planning. It just fell badly. It was just one of those things where it's like, you had a good concept, you had a good idea, but I think if you planned it more, it would have stuck with people. And I think people would have really loved The Last Jedi. I mean, because I remember how excited we were. We were saying like, oh man, the words are in red. What does that mean? What is The Last Jedi?
Yeah,
I mean, like
that's
we're
right.
analyzing the
I
crap
forgot
out of this
about
thing.
that. Yeah, we're all
man.
like, oh man, the words are in red. That's got to be something.
You know, and it's like, you know, Lucas talking about, well, it's time for the Jedi to die. And you're just like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, that's right. With that trailer, you know, it's
Yeah.
time for the Jedi to end, and you're just like, oh man, and that's it. You know, the problem is a trailer sometimes can just give you expectations. Same thing with the Karate Kid 3. It's like they give you these expectations that when they don't live up to them, because again, I remember when you and I came out of the theater, we didn't really know even what to think. We didn't even talk for like 15 minutes or something stupid.
Yeah, we had to like really process that. But, you know,
Yeah.
and that's the thing with like, okay, well, now you have to ask yourself the question, was that a true Kathleen Kennedy decision? Like, did she really say, okay, this is what I want? Or was it up to her creative team? Did she just trust her creative team to deliver something and, you know, she just kind of went with it?
No, I mean, think about it, man. Kathleen Kennedy herself has been firing like practically every director that walks through the door, and she usually waits until they've completed a good significant chunk of the movie.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, so Force Awakens, JJ stayed on, fine, right? Then Gareth Edwards, he did Rogue One, fine.
But no, Gareth Edwards was actually, there was, who was it? There was some guy that actually came in and directed a bunch of scenes for that movie. The Rogue One, that's why you had all the reshoots and everybody was
You
freaking
did
out.
have a bunch of,
Oh,
half the
yeah.
well, the trailer wasn't even in the movie.
Yeah,
basically.
that was a big thing, man. I mean, the guy that did the music was like fired halfway through and they got somebody else. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff that happened with Rogue One. Actually, and even JJ, she had questioned him for a while. The only one that got kind of a free pass was Rian Johnson. That's why
Well, I
everybody was
remember-
freaking out.
Well, yeah, I remember that. I remember Brian Johnson basically having that free pass, but I thought Gareth Edwards.
No,
was good.
Gareth Edwards. I mean, he didn't even. There was a chunk of the movie he didn't even direct. It was I can't remember who it was, but there was some guy they brought in to direct like a lot of the scenes, including some of the Vader scenes and some of the other stuff to like almost like as a Band-Aid because she didn't trust his vision. That's what everybody's biggest complaint about her is that she'll bring these people in and then she gets cold feet at the last minute. Then she wants to micromanage everything.
So let me ask you this question then. So with Kathleen Kennedy, because like I actually took the time to, it's actually kind of a cool site, but I actually went to the Lucasfilm site, and on the Lucasfilm site, you know, they have pretty much all the different leaders of the various departments and stuff like that. And I must say that it's cool to see, like, you do have a lot of women, you know, who are pretty much like running the ship.
Well, you do now because that's part of her whole SJW, you know, thing. Like everything's got to be female centric now. It's crazy.
So, I mean, but when you look at, you know, the leadership, you know, you have, and I wonder what happened to, because I don't see Pablo Hidalgo on here at all. And that surprises me.
What, is the head of the story group?
Yeah, well, I mean, they have like a lot of the, like vice president of, let's see, because I know they actually have like two divisions where they actually have like the vice president, like Michael Garcia, vice president of live action series development. Doug Chang, a vice president and executive creative director for Star Wars. So like, and I know he's been around for a while.
Yeah, he's been around for a while.
Right. So let's just take like some of these people, and once again, do they really understand? Like now, Doug, because he's been there since the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, or pretty much maybe towards the end, like maybe
At least with the
Jedi.
prequels or something.
Yeah, or prequels maybe.
But you're right. He may have even brushed the original trilogy. I honestly don't remember.
But you know, you're looking at these people, and I'm wondering, like, okay, where does the story group, you know what I'm saying, like, okay, do the story group report to the creative directors, and then they report to Kathleen? Like, I just kind of wonder, like, how this, like, how does it actually come together to make a final decision on what's
I mean,
to
that's
happen?
it. She basically just has to, again, she's acting more like a producer than a studio head. You know, producers are the ones that have to micromanage a little bit. They're the ones that are getting the crew to getting everything. They're more attached to the project, per se. The studio heads, their whole job is to basically oversee the whole operation, make sure everything's on budget, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But her whole thing is she just, first of all, it's kind of like what a lot of people say. I don't really even know if she truly understands Star Wars anyway. She's the same one that said there was no source material.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, so let me ask you this question. So do you think Kathleen should be the producer? Because if you're saying like the producer's the one who's getting the crews and everything like that, well, that means she would be the one bringing in Ryan Johnson and everybody like that, which that's kind of the reason. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, well, I mean,
but if she's a studio head.
Well, but that's it. It's kind of like they're both. The fact is she's trying to be somewhat of a producer, but then also a studio head, and she's failing at both.
Mm-hmm.
There's areas of success. I'm not saying that
True.
she's a complete failure, but overall, you know, the fact of the matter is,
She's throwing the candle at both ends, basically.
yeah, and I mean, people didn't. I mean, granted, all right, there was the whole George Lucas backlash with the prequels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't pretend like Disney was the first time everybody decided they hated Star Wars. You know, people were constantly like talking about Lucas, about how they ruined his, you know, their childhood because he made the Phantom Menace or something. But that said, though, people could give Lucas the pass because he's the one that created everything.
Right.
And honestly, that was Lucas's attitude. Like, listen, you don't like it, move on. I'm making this stuff for me, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars is mine.
Right.
You know, it's like, I'm the one that decides. I mean, he actually gave an interview not too long ago, like maybe within the last week, where this kid, he was, and it's online somewhere, but basically he was speaking before these little kids or something, and this kid asked him, you know, like what he thinks of the new movies or whatever, and he was just basically like, look, Star Wars for me is the first 6 movies and the Clone Wars. You know, that's my Star Wars. He's like, I really don't have anything to do with this new Star Wars or the direction it's going or anything. And it's not really the direction I would go, but, you know, it's kind of like one of those, it is what it is. But he's essentially saying, look, Star Wars as I created it is this. So this is one of the things, by the way, that a lot of fans are saying that they could use to nullify the whole sequel trilogy as canon. Because you could just look at it like, well, Lucas doesn't consider it canon. So if all of a sudden either Disney wanted to reboot it or somebody else wanted to reboot it, they could technically do it. And, you know, it wouldn't be the smartest thing to do in the world, probably. But, I mean, they could technically do it. But the problem is, and this is what I keep telling people, you probably wouldn't like where Lucas would want to go with it. Now, I will say that after reading some of the treatment, I got through the whole, like, little nano force creatures or whatever it was. Some of the stuff was actually kind of cool. Because he had sort of a, like, Rey was called Kira, which, of course, they just nicked that name and put it in Solo. But the way that they had, like, Luke instructing her and all that stuff, I think it would have been a cooler version of what The Last Jedi would have been. And, you know, again, it kind of sucks because Carrie Fisher's no longer with us. So it's sort of like, if they wanted to do a do-over, you couldn't get the entire original cast.
Right.
But, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say because the thing that you have to consider is, okay, Kathleen Kennedy's contract has been extended. She can continue to do this stuff. So let's just say, for instance, that a lot of fans got their wish, right? So a lot of fans get their wish. Kathleen Kennedy is fired. Okay, well, now what? Now, a lot of us have said, hey, put Dave Filoni in there. Make him the studio head. But the problem is, I don't think you'd want him as a studio head because you want him kind of at the front lines making this stuff.
Yeah, no, I want him like in the story group, the guy who's kind of commissioning, you know, the stories. Now, what I would say for the studio head part, maybe Pablo Hidalgo, maybe Kevin Feige.
Well, Kevin Feige is the one that I think a lot of people would turn to. And if you don't put a Kevin Feige in there, then you get somebody that's like him.
Exactly. So I think you put somebody like that who understands. And that's the thing with Marvel is that Marvel, you have all this, as I say, like source material to pull from. So you have stories that's just, in comics and, you just bring them to life at this point. But but Star Wars has plenty of source material too, because you have plenty of books, like you said, the whole, expanded universe. That's a whole plethora of stories. Like you said, we could do the Hughes and Vaughn story, and that fits. You can do, Heir to the Empire and all that with the new group if that's what they wanted to do with Rey, Finn, and Poe. You could have done that. I think that Kathleen probably should be gone because I just don't think that she understands Star Wars. And so because you don't understand the product that you have, you really don't need to manage it.
Well, ultimately, I would agree. I would just say, you know what? I mean, I wasn't necessarily at first one of the people that was calling for her to be fired like a lot of fans, but I did quickly move into that camp because, I would just agree. And ironically enough, Monday's show that we're going to do is actually going to cover a lot about the future of Star Wars. Not quite the way we did before.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a little bit different, but it's definitely some paths. Like, okay, this past Monday, we did the whole Skywalkers. Are they vital to the whole Star Wars universe? We agreed no.
Right.
You can move past the Skywalkers and have it still feel like Star Wars, have it still be viable. So the question then becomes, how? What projects do you have? Now, Monday, what we'll do is we'll start talking about some of the projects that we already know are in the works. I mean, we did a show on that not too long ago, but we'll go back, mention some of that stuff, and then we'll talk about what could they do now at this point that would not only be interesting and further the franchise and develop the characters, but at the same time also bring the fan base back together.
Right.
So, hopefully everybody joins us for that one Monday at 8 o'clock. But yeah, I think overall, that I think she should probably
step down,
be fired, whatever, but
get her out of there.
But the point is, we got another 3 years with her. So I think what we'll cover, on Monday's show is just, okay, well, now what? Yes. Where do we go from here?
So she is. So since we know that she's not going anywhere.
Yeah, we know she's not going anywhere. So
what do you do with her? It's kind of like, it's kind of like how, those of us who are Michigan Wolverine football fans like myself, that's kind of the way we felt about, Harbaugh. It's like we felt like, okay, he's going to be the guy. He's a Michigan man. He's going to, bring us back to the glory days. And he's done a decent job, but he hasn't really won the big game.
I'll go one better. If you're unfortunate enough to be a Lions fan.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
You have that hope every year. You keep thinking, okay, well, they changed this and they changed that and they changed the other.
Right.
And bottom line is, unless they change the owners, that's my personal opinion, because that's the only thing they haven't done in the last how many ever decades it's been.
Yeah, since like the 50s.
Right. And it's kind of like, look, if you guys, not this is like a sports podcast or anything, but if you guys haven't, if you keep losing, like no matter what you do, you've changed like team members, you change coaches, you change like virtually every position there is, and you're still getting the same results, maybe you look at the one thing you haven't changed.
Exactly.
And that's what you have to do, I think, in some cases with Star Wars as well. You have to look at, okay, what's broken, how and where and why did it break,
mm-hmm.
and then not necessarily like assigning blame, but just here's how you fix it, address it. Right. All right, now let me ask you this. Because I didn't actually ask you this before the show, do we have clear your mind questions?
We don't.
We don't. Well then, I guess we're not really going to be taking your 2 questions for the week and answering them. But I don't know. You actually wrote in once. I'm surprised you didn't pull that again.
You want me to write my own question?
Well, I mean, we don't necessarily have to. I mean, it's kind of funny because, you know, a lot of times when people write in the questions for us, like I said, I try not to read them too closely because I want to keep the show spontaneous. I want to keep things going, but I can't help but sometimes go, wow, you know, I wonder. Sometimes people actually will ask questions where I kind of either once wondered myself or maybe I still struggle with it, you know? And it's kind of like, because the QRA site, I mean, constantly. And I could always draw questions from that because people are constantly requesting my answers to these questions. And some of them are hard, man. I mean, you know, some of them I'll answer, but some of them are just like, guys, there's just like it's too involved. I can't, or I don't even know.
Right.
Like they're way, way ahead of me as far as being a fan or whatever. I mean, I always thought of myself as the ultimate Star Wars fan, but dude, some of these people are just like
insane.
Really, like with the depth of knowledge they have, which is why I'm glad that when we started this show, it was more of a discussion show, and you know, it's more of the philosophies and the different characters and some of the stuff, and just like kind of how most people, I think, would get together and discuss Star Wars. It's not like some sort of a trivia type of thing, which is funny because our friends at Sith Talkers, I don't remember when they streamed it. It was sometime within the last week, though. They actually, remember that Star Wars Trivial Pursuit game? And they actually started playing that. I don't think they actually played the game. I think they were just reading the cards and answering the questions. But I remember it was funny, like back when that first came out, and I had a Christmas party with me and a bunch of the guys, and we decided to play it. And I mean, obviously I won, but I mean, it was super hard.
Right.
You know, so I mean, it might actually be kind of fun to.
I'm gonna do that one day.
You know, maybe do a show around that, like. You know, and then, of course, people, especially people on Twitch, are like, oh, you guys should, you know, play some of the games and stream that. So I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it's someday. I've been trying to get a PS5 now for
good luck.
A while. You know, well, it's funny because there's one of my IT friends actually got a couple of them because there was some like little bot or something that would constantly check all the store stocks like 24/7. And as soon as one hit, it would put it in his cart for him. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to resort to that. But hopefully you guys can, you know, join us Monday, 8 o'clock, where we're going to talk a little bit about the future of Star Wars and you know, where can they go? And now that Kathleen Kennedy's there, what does that mean? You know, unfortunately, really depending on where you guys sit on this, if you like her, you're probably going, yeah, cool, 3 more years, you know? If you don't, then you're probably like, crap, 3 more years, you know? But I really do think that this is a critical time in Star Wars. So we're going to talk Monday about what can we do, or what can they do that will either reignite the fan base or maybe tell better stories or whatever. So it should be a really cool discussion. So, you know, hopefully we see you guys then. So with that said, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.